For over 20 years, Clifford Harris demanded absolute reverence. He was the king of the South, a hip-hop titan who shielded himself with sharp words, a hyper-articulate vocabulary, and an untouchable alpha ego. His final retirement album, Kill the King, was supposed to be his majestic, dignified exit from the throne, a monument to his legacy. Instead, that grand finale was ruthlessly hijacked by the most fearless, unfiltered voice in modern comedy. Katt Williams didn't just critique the music. He launched a merciless, viral execution, stripping the king of his robes using nothing but raw, unapologetic ridicule. Suddenly, a multi-platinum pioneer is facing a devastating psychological trap. How do you defend an empire when the entire world is laughing at you? To understand how a legendary retirement rollout turned into a cultural execution, we have to look at the exact moment the court jester decided to destroy the king. It happened with the sudden, violent clarity of a lightning strike on a clear night. Without a press release, without a warning shot, a video materialized on the internet that instantly shifted the axis of the entire hip-hop conversation. Katt Williams sat before a camera, completely unbothered, radiating the calm, dangerous energy of a man who knows he is about to set a house on fire. He didn't offer a standard track-by-track breakdown. He didn't analyze the mixing or critique the production choices. Instead, he launched a scorched earth, merciless assault on the very soul of Kill the King. With that signature, piercing cadence, a voice that handles truths like a surgeon handles a scalpel, Katt Williams looked directly into the lens and systematically dismantled a legacy 20 years in the making. He didn't just call the album bad. He called it a historic catastrophe. He dismissed the entire retirement rollout as an act of absolute delusion, a collection of sonic garbage wrapped in the unearned arrogance of an aging monarch. The critique was brutal because it was profoundly specific. Katt targeted the very foundation of T.I.'s identity, his lyricism and his hyper-articulate alpha posture. For decades, Clifford Harris had operated under the assumption that he could out-talk, out-think, and outmaneuver anyone in the room. But Katt turned that verbal shield into a punchline. He mocked the complex vocabulary, the paternalistic lecturing, and the self-important gravity that T.I. injected into every single bar of the project. Katt didn't just review an album. He performed a public autopsy on an ego. He laughed at the theatricality of Kill the King, transforming what was meant to be a solemn, operatic final curtain call into a viral execution. The digital landscape fractured instantly. Within hours, the narrative surrounding Kill the King completely mutated. Streaming metrics and promotional strategies were instantly eclipsed by a tidal wave of public ridicule. The internet, as it always does, weaponized the comedian's words, turning the album's most serious and vulnerable moments into endless loops of social media memes. But beneath the surface of the laughter, a much darker, highly volatile psychological drama began to unfold. T.I. is a man whose entire existence is anchored in the preservation of respect. He is a street-tested pioneer who has faced federal weapon indictments, violent rivalries, and intense public scrutiny, and in every single arena, his response has been the same: aggressive, unyielding defiance. He knows how to handle an enemy who threatens his life or challenges his status. But he was entirely unprepared for an opponent who simply laughed in his face. This is the ultimate alpha trap. Ridicule is a unique kind of warfare because it robs the victim of their gravity. If T.I. reacts with his usual fiery indignation, if he releases a tense video or steps to a microphone to deliver a multi-syllabic lecture on respect, he validates the joke. He descends from his throne to scramble in the dirt with a comedian. But if he chooses absolute, frozen silence, he allows the public to believe that the comedian broke him. Right now, behind closed doors, a silent standoff is taking place. T.I.'s response has been a heavy, suffocating stillness, a tense composure that looks less like peace and more like a volcano holding its breath. He moves through his remaining obligations with an unblinking, rigid focus, pretending the world isn't laughing, while his constructed reality crumbles around him. The stakes are no longer about album sales or Billboard charts. The king is sitting in a silent room, fully aware that his final monument hasn't just been criticized, it has been reduced to a joke, leaving a Titan to calculate his next move in a game where his dignity is already slipping through his fingers. To truly understand the volatile chemistry of this moment, you have to realize that this viral execution was not a random accident of the internet algorithm. It was the predictable, inevitable collision of two entirely incompatible human archetypes who have been on a cosmic crash course for over 2 decades. In the cultural landscape of the entertainment industry, Clifford Harris and Katt Williams represent two opposing forces of nature. One is the absolute master of curation, a man who has spent 30 years meticulously building an impenetrable fortress around his name, his street status, and his intellect. The other is a demolition expert, a chaotic truth-teller whose entire life's work is dedicated to identifying the most fragile, self-important egos in the room and detonating them for the public's amusement. This latest explosion wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the final, devastating chapter in a long, unwritten war between absolute hubris and unvarnished reality. Let us look first at the pattern of the king. For 25 years, T.I. didn't just rap. He conducted a brilliant, calculated masterclass in psychological dominance. He entered an industry that traditionally valued raw, uneducated street energy and forced it to respect his mind. He adopted a unique linguistic shield, utilizing a vast, multisyllabic vocabulary that he wore like a piece of customized armor. It was brilliant, but it was also deeply transactional. Every time he adjusted his glasses on a political panel, every time he used complex, archaic words to correct an interviewer, and every time he sat on a stage to paternalistically lecture the younger generation about street ethics, he was reinforcing a singular psychological narrative. I am superior to everyone in this room. This wasn't just a rap persona, it was a profound obsession with control. Clifford Harris constructed a reality where he was not just a musician, but the moral, intellectual, and structural compass of the culture. He became a self-appointed savior, a man who believed his own myth so completely that he forgot that thrones are only stable as long as the subjects are willing to look up. But this psychological armor carried a fatal, systemic flaw. The problem with building an entire identity out of intellectual dominance and alpha posturing is that it leaves you completely defenseless against the one thing you cannot reason with: pure, unapologetic absurdity. T.I. could survive a lyrical war with a rival rapper because a rap beef operates on rules he understands: strategy, posturing, and aggressive bars. He could survive a federal indictment because the legal system responds to high-priced logic and structured arguments. But he had no defense mechanism for a man who didn't care about his titles, his vocabulary, or his historical legacy. He had no defense against a comedian who looked at the king's royal robes and realized they were made of paper. Enter Katt Williams. To study Katt's career is to study a man who operates entirely outside the boundaries of industry decorum and corporate safety. While other celebrities spend their careers protecting their relationships and playing the careful political game of Hollywood, Katt has consistently operated as a loose cannon, a modern-day court jester who possesses the terrifying power to speak the unspeakable. His pattern is historically well-documented. He waits. He watches the industry elite grow comfortable in their own self-importance. He watches them build massive, fragile monuments to their own greatness, and then, at the exact moment their arrogance reaches its absolute peak, he strikes with surgical precision. We have seen this pattern manifest time and time again, where he single-handedly tore down the carefully managed reputations of some of the most powerful names in comedy and acting. He understands a profound, dark truth about human nature. The bigger the ego, the louder it pops when you stick a pin in it. When T.I. announced Kill the King, he unknowingly handed Katt Williams the ultimate invitation. The title of the album itself was the absolute zenith of his alpha pattern, a masterclass in grandiosity. It was T.I. attempting to script his own tragic, operatic exit from the rap game, a self-glorifying performance where he was both the sacrifice and the deity. He wanted the world to look at his retirement as a monumental historical event, a dark, solemn moment of cultural mourning for the loss of a ruler. He wanted us to take him seriously. And that is precisely why Katt Williams could not resist. Comedy, in its truest and most philosophical form, is the ultimate equalizer. It exists to remind the powerful that they bleed, that they age, and that their grandest accomplishments can be reduced to a punchline in a matter of seconds. Katt saw the heavy theatricality of T.I.'s rollout, the serious promotional interviews, the brooding cinematic trailers, the legacy-building narratives, and he recognized it for what it truly was: a giant, beautiful glass house waiting for a rock. When Katt dropped his review, he didn't just share an opinion on the music, he targeted the pattern of T.I.'s entire existence. He took the hyper-articulate vocabulary and exposed it as empty pretension. He took the alpha ego and revealed it to be a fragile defense mechanism. It was a collision 30 years in the making, the final, devastating reckoning between a man who desperately needed to be worshipped as a king and a man who refused to see him as anything more than a human being trying too hard to hold onto a crown that had already slipped from his grasp. The pattern was complete, the trap was sprung, and for the first time in his legendary career, the king found himself in a war where his words were completely useless. The aftermath of Katt Williams' digital airstrike was not a slow burn. It was a total, instantaneous atmospheric shift. Within 24 hours, the video had ceased to be a simple review and had transformed into a sweeping cultural referendum on the validity of Clifford Harris. This is where the true escalation begins. The terrifying moment when a joke stops being funny and starts becoming the official history. The digital ecosystem did what it does best. It took Katt's most devastating insults and chopped them into millions of algorithmic weapons. On TikTok, Instagram, and X, clips of the comedian mimicking T.I.'s hyper-deliberate speech patterns flooded the timelines. Reaction channels didn't analyze the lyricism of Kill the King. They reacted to the execution of its creator. The conversation surrounding the album completely broke down. It was no longer a question of whether the music was objectively good or bad. The culture had collectively decided on a new, far more humiliating narrative. T.I. was try-hard, outdated, and fundamentally out of touch. The corporate and cultural machinery backing the album rollout began to fracture under the weight of this universal mockery. In the modern attention economy, controversy can sometimes drive streams, but ridicule is a terminal diagnosis. Major radio programmers, who had initially lined up to give the King of the South a triumphant retirement victory lap, suddenly found themselves in an impossible position. Playing a track from Kill the King was no longer an act of paying homage to a legend. It was an invitation for the listening audience to remember the punchline. Club DJs in Atlanta, the very city that T.I. had spent a lifetime defending and representing, quietly slid the album tracks down their playlists. The commercial viability of the entire project evaporated in real time. Boardrooms that had spent months calculating the financial returns of this historic retirement rollout were suddenly forced to watch the entire investment get swallowed by the echo chamber of public laughter. But the financial damage was nothing compared to the psychological warfare taking place inside the Harris empire. T.I. is not just an individual. He is the patriarch of a highly visible, intensely scrutinized family dynasty. For years, he had operated as the ultimate authority figure, the wise, all-knowing philosopher who guided his children through the treacherous waters of public life and street politics. He had built a fortress of respectability designed to protect his family's future. But Katt Williams didn't just breach the fortress. He made it look ridiculous. The ultimate cruelty of this escalation was that it stripped T.I. of his authority in front of the very culture he had spent decades trying to educate. His son, King Harris, who had spent his young life engaging in volatile, reckless behavior to prove his own street credibility, was now watching his father, the ultimate alpha, the man who had lectured him on composure and legacy, get stripped of his dignity by a man with a microphone and a perm. The tension within the household became claustrophobic, a heavy, unexpressed fury radiating from a monarch who realized his lineage was being branded with the stamp of irrelevance. This realization pushed the conflict toward its absolute zenith, the inescapable necessity of a response. In the brutal economy of hip-hop, you cannot allow an attack of this magnitude to stand without a countermove. But the battlefield had been completely compromised. T.I. was trapped in a chess game where every single piece on the board was rigged to explode. If he chose to release a traditional diss track, he would look utterly absurd, a multi-platinum trap pioneer rapping aggressively about a stand-up comedian. If he chose to utilize his vast street connections to orchestrate a physical confrontation, the optics would be even more catastrophic. Pulling up on Katt Williams, or having him cornered in a venue, would not prove T.I.'s toughness. It would prove his fragility. It would show the world that the King of the South was so deeply wounded by a comedian's jokes that he had to resort to intimidation to silence him. He would look like a bully who lost his mind because he couldn't handle the truth. The escalation reached its absolute peak in the heavy, suffocating silence that T.I. chose to maintain as his primary defense. It was a cold, rigid stoicism that fooled absolutely no one. Every silent day that passed felt less like a strategic choice and more like a slow, painful surrender to the comedian's narrative. The grand, operatic retirement he had meticulously planned for Kill the King had been utterly hijacked. The climax of his 30-year career was no longer a celebration of his genius, but a public standoff against his own obsolescence. He was a man drowning in a void of absolute, deafening indifference, forced to watch his life's work get consumed by a viral comedy special, fully aware that the crown he had fought so hard to protect had finally been turned into a prop for the world's entertainment. Yet, if we restrict our gaze to the smoke of this digital battlefield, we miss the quiet tragedy unfolding in the heart of the man himself. Clifford Harris is not a hollow caricature of an overinflated ego, nor is he merely a target for a comedian's sharpest wit. Beneath the multi-layered armor of the King of the South lies a deeply human creator who poured the raw, bleeding fragments of his youth into building the very culture that is now laughing at his departure. To reduce his 30-year monument to a single viral punchline is to misunderstand the profound weight of what it means to be a pioneer. Long before the complex vocabulary and the reality TV cameras, there was just a brilliant, desperate kid from Bankhead writing poetry in the dark, using his voice as a machete to carve out a path for an entire city. We must remember that T.I. did not inherit a kingdom, he built it out of the absolute mud. He gave a voice to a disenfranchised Southern underclass when the global music industry treated Atlanta like a temporary novelty. He was the architect who took the chaotic, perilous survival strategies of the streets and elevated them into a globally recognized genre. Beyond his own multi-platinum plaques, his humanity lives through his unseen contributions. This is the man who funded local community centers, purchased real estate to protect his childhood neighborhoods from predatory gentrification, and quietly pulled millions out of his own pockets to feed families during historical crises. He was the one who looked at a young, misunderstood Travis Scott or an underground Kid Cudi and recognized their genius when major labels closed their doors. He has consistently tried to be a savior, a provider, and a guiding light, even while his own halo was melting under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The profound irony of Kill the King is that beneath the bravado Katt Williams mocked, the album houses some of the most fragile, introspective writing of T.I.'s career. It was never meant to be a flawless victory lap. It was a desperate, bleeding plea for grace. It was the work of an aging warrior looking at his scars in the mirror, fully aware that his time in the sun was setting, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that no longer requires his warfare. Nowhere is this human vulnerability more devastating than in his role as a father. For years, the world has watched T.I. publicly struggle to anchor his family, navigating the volatile, reckless antics of his son, King Harris. The internet made memes out of the viral arguments and the roadside altercations. But beneath the clicks lies the universal, heartbreaking terror of a father who has spent 2 decades trying to pull his children back from the edge of the exact same cliff he nearly fell off. In his poignant song, Dear Son, he laid his armor completely flat, speaking with a raw vulnerability about his failures and his desperate hopes for his children's future. He isn't a heartless caricature in those lyrics. He is a terrified parent who knows his past sins have cast a long shadow over the people he loves most. In those quiet studio sessions, Clifford Harris is not a monarch demanding a crown. He is a tired creator who chose survival in a genre that demands martyrdom. He wanted to walk away with his dignity intact, to be remembered for the music rather than the ridicule. The tragedy of the king is that he is beautifully, painfully human, and the culture he helped birth has no room for his humanity. In the unwritten ledger of hip-hop, there is a dark, recurring truth. The culture loves its heroes best when they are romanticized tragedies. It knows how to build monuments for the fallen, but it has absolutely no grace for the pioneer who survives long enough to watch his own obsolescence. Clifford Harris chose to live. He chose his family, his freedom, and his future over the fatal expectations of the streets. But in the brutal arena of modern celebrity, survival carries a heavy, compounding tax. And for T.I., that tax was paid in the absolute destruction of his gravity. The viral execution of Kill the King proves that you can spend 30 years building an empire, handcrafting the sonic architecture of an entire city, and still have your life's work reduced to a punchline in a fraction of a second. Katt Williams didn't need a weapon or a traditional diss track to dethrone the monarch. He simply held up the funhouse mirror of public ridicule, and the illusion of the king instantly vanished. We are left to wonder what happens to a ruler when the court stops bowing and starts laughing. T.I. wanted to script his own majestic exit to kill the king on his own terms. But the game, cold and transactional as it has always been, let a comedian deliver the final blow. The microphone is cold. The studio is dark. And as the final credits roll, we are left with the realization that the hardest part of wearing a crown isn't capturing the throne. It's realizing the kingdom is laughing as you step down.